Some people speak, and the world stops to listen. They don't shout. They don't beg. They don't even need to repeat themselves. But somehow, every word they say lands with force, sticks with meaning, and lingers in the minds of those who hear it. They've mastered the art of communication, not as a tool for talking, but as a weapon for influence. It's hidden in silence, in timing, in emotional rhythm. These are the world's most persuasive minds, and what they know is not taught in school, not found in textbooks, and not spoken out loud. In this audiobook, you'll learn what they know. You'll be trained in the invisible skills behind powerful presence, subtle influence, and emotional control. If you're ready to become unforgettable when you speak, then keep listening. And once you understand it, people begin to feel you, follow you, and remember you, long after your words are gone. And make sure to subscribe, so you never miss a single moment of the transformation that begins right here. Chapter 1. The silent power behind every influential voice. Some people don't need to raise their voice. They simply walk into a room, and the atmosphere shifts. There's a stillness that follows them, like the room already knows something important is about to happen. It's not magic. It's not luck. It's the energy of someone who understands how to communicate without making noise. The most persuasive minds in the world don't begin with speech. They begin with silence. They begin with attention. They begin by understanding that communication is not about how much you say, but how deeply your presence is felt. Persuasion doesn't live in the content. It lives in the delivery. The same sentence can feel like a threat or a promise, depending on tone. A single word can start a war or heal a wound, depending on how it's said. The most powerful communicators know this. That's why they spend less time thinking of the perfect line and more time crafting the perfect energy. Their voice carries the rhythm of calm control. Their words feel heavier, not because they're complex, but because they are chosen with care. The world is loud. It's full of shouting, explaining, arguing, proving. But those who master influence never compete with noise. They create gravity. They draw others in. They speak slower. They hold eye contact longer. They pause more. They wait until the silence is heavy enough that their first word lands like a hammer on glass, because they know this one truth. People don't remember the most clever speaker. They remember the one who made them feel something. Before they speak, they watch. They read the room. They feel the mood. They're not distracted by their own thoughts or trying to impress anyone. They are fully present, and in that presence, they pick up what others miss. A nervous glance, a clenched fist, a held breath. They hear what isn't being said. That's how they know where to aim their words, not just to be heard, but to be absorbed. This calm comes from preparation. Not just the words they'll say, but the identity they bring into the room. They walk in with clarity about who they are, what they stand for, and what their message means to them. That clarity becomes confidence, not the loud kind that needs applause, but the quiet kind that doesn't fear silence. And when someone with that kind of clarity speaks, the world listens, not because they demand it, but because they deserve it. Persuasion is built long before the moment of speaking. It's built in the way you carry yourself when no one's watching. It's built in how you treat people when you don't need them. It's built in how consistent your values are with your actions. The world may not say it out loud, but it knows when someone is authentic, and it always trusts that voice more than the most rehearsed speech. It begins with control, not over others, but over the self. Emotional control is the first requirement for persuasive communication. You cannot influence the emotions of others if you're a slave to your own. The most persuasive minds are grounded. They don't react to disrespect with more disrespect. They don't let nerves steal their rhythm. They don't rush to fill silence. They are slow, calm, certain, like a mountain watching the wind. When these minds do speak, they do so with precision. They don't rush. They don't ramble. Every sentence serves a purpose. Every pause is strategic. They understand rhythm. They understand emotional pacing. They understand how to build tension, hold it, and release it with impact. Their words unfold like a story, not a script. Their delivery carries weight because it's soaked in intent. You feel like they're speaking to you, even in a room of hundreds. This connection is not accidental. It's designed. It comes from empathy, from listening deeply, and from speaking with the heart as much as with the mouth. The best communicators are emotional translators. They take what others are feeling but can't express and give it language. They don't just speak, they reveal. They say what everyone is afraid to admit, and they do it with gentleness, not judgment. The real power of communication is not in making people think, it's in making them feel safe enough to hear something that might change them. Persuasive minds are not in love with their own voice, they're in love with transformation. They speak to serve, not to shine, and that's why they shine anyway. These people don't argue. They ask questions that disarm. They don't preach, they share stories that connect. They don't tell you what to do, they show you who you are. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're already leaning in. It's not about being liked, it's about being trusted. And trust is built through consistency, through honesty, through self-respect. Persuasive people don't chase popularity, they chase truth. And the strange thing is, when you speak from that place, people can't ignore you. Their confidence is quiet. It doesn't walk in the room and announce itself. It waits. It lets others speak. It listens, not to respond, but to understand. And when the moment is right, it speaks just enough to move the conversation forward. Not to dominate it, not to impress it, just to guide it. But beyond all technique, their greatest secret is intention. Before they speak, they ask themselves, why am I saying this? What do I want this person to feel, not just know? How can I serve them in this moment? That shift from me to we is what makes their voice unforgettable. In a world full of noise, persuasive people are a breath of clarity. The tone of their voice is never accidental. It's shaped by the emotion behind it. When they want to be serious, their voice lowers, not to intimidate, but to invite focus. When they want to show compassion, it softens, not to manipulate, but to mirror care. Every inflection, every breath, every shift in pace has meaning. In a world full of performance, they are truth. It just can't be ignored. And that truth is never loud. And somehow, by giving it, they receive it back tenfold. The way they dress, the way they enter the room, the way they sit, the way they respond, every small detail reflects a person who understands their own impact. They don't wait to be given permission. They walk with the quiet authority of someone who already belongs. Because in their mind, the room doesn't give them value. They bring value to the room. If there's one thread that connects all the world's most persuasive minds, it's this: they don't talk to impress, they talk to connect. They don't aim to win arguments, they aim to build bridges. They don't seek attention, they give it. Because in the end, persuasion isn't about clever words. That's the paradox of true communication. The less you try to dominate, the more influence you gain. The more you care about others, the more they care what you think. The more honest you are, the more power your words carry. It's about earned respect, and respect, like all things real, can't be faked. Chapter 2. The Rhythm of Connection. How timing builds emotional authority. The most persuasive voices in the world never rush. They move like a dance, measured, intentional, tuned to the invisible rhythm of human emotion. They understand that people don't just listen with their ears. People listen with their hearts, and hearts move at their own pace. Too fast, and you overwhelm them. Too slow, and you lose them. But just right, and you guide them into your world without resistance. Timing is the unsung hero of communication. It's not only when you speak, it's also when you don't. The pause after a bold statement, the breath before a truth, the space between sentences where silence lingers just long enough to let something sink in. Those are the moments that make words matter, because in persuasion, power lives not in constant noise, but in well-placed silence. The persuasive mind doesn't rush to answer. They let the silence do part of the work. When someone finishes speaking, they wait just a beat longer than most. And in that beat, something powerful happens. The other person feels heard, seen, valued, and suddenly they're open. Because when you pause, it feels like you're thinking, reflecting, considering. That pause builds trust. But this timing isn't random. It's intuitive. It's practiced. It comes from watching faces, reading tension, feeling the emotion in a room and matching your pace to it. Like a musician who slows the tempo just before the chorus to create impact, the persuasive speaker slows their rhythm before a truth bomb. They know when to let a phrase breathe, when to punch a word with sharpness, when to soften the pace to bring someone closer. In one-on-one conversations, timing is everything. The best communicators know how to sync with the emotional rhythm of the person across from them. If someone's nervous, they slow down. If someone's excited, they match that energy just enough to keep the momentum. If someone's guarded, they don't force the conversation forward. They let space open and wait. The timing also shows up in storytelling. Persuasive minds don't just tell stories, they tell well-timed stories. They know when to reveal a personal detail, when to add tension, when to pause just before the climax, and when to end with silence that lets the listener process what just happened. The timing of a story isn't about entertainment, it's about connection. It's about keeping the emotional thread taut and alive. In groups, it's even more critical. When speaking to a crowd, the most persuasive communicators don't read their slides, they read the room. They sense when the energy drops. They feel when people lean in. They change pace based on facial expressions, body language, and even breathing. This awareness allows them to shift rhythm, speed up to energize, slow down to emphasize, pause to make a statement unforgettable. The reason this works is simple. People remember how something felt, not just what was said. A fast-paced delivery, full of content, might inform, but it rarely persuades. But a message delivered with emotional rhythm sticks. It sinks into memory, because it felt like music, and music, when done right, moves people without needing to explain itself. Children understand rhythm before they learn words, so do adults. That's why we tap our feet when we hear a beat. That's why certain speakers make us nod, smile, even tear up, because they've aligned their rhythm with our nervous system. They've stopped performing and started connecting. Emotional authority comes from this alignment. It's not about overpowering others with charisma. It's about creating such emotional safety and presence that others want to hear more. You don't build this authority by talking faster, louder, or smarter. You build it by slowing down, by leaving room for feeling, by letting your words carry weight, not just volume. Think about the great speeches in history. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't rush. He let each line echo. He gave space after his most powerful phrases, so the crowd could respond emotionally. Every pause was a cue. This is important, feel it. That's how his words entered people's hearts, not because he said something new, but because he delivered it with emotional timing. Even in casual conversation, persuasive minds hold their rhythm. They're not in a hurry to make their point. They don't interrupt. They don't fidget. They sit in stillness, letting others feel safe. And when they speak, it feels like something that's meant to be heard, not just said. There's also power in letting people wait. When you take a second before answering a difficult question, it signals depth. It says you're not just reacting, you're responding. That moment of silence separates you from the noise of everyday conversation. It shows maturity, confidence, control. On the flip side, the lack of rhythm creates the opposite effect. Rushed speech feels nervous, Monotone delivery feels robotic. Talking too much without space makes people disengage. Timing isn't just an artistic choice, it's a psychological trigger. It tells the listener how to feel, what to trust, whether to lean in or tune out. Persuasive communication feels smooth because it follows emotional logic, not intellectual logic. It doesn't just appeal to the brain, it calms the body. It reduces anxiety. It builds a steady pace that makes people feel grounded. When you control rhythm, you don't just speak well, you become a regulated nervous system in the room, and that is magnetic. People are drawn to what feels stable, and a speaker with emotional timing becomes that anchor. They guide others not just with ideas, but with pace. The way they hold silence after a personal story, the way they lower their voice when sharing something vulnerable, the way they let their audience feel the moment before they move forward again. These moments make the message unforgettable. This rhythm is also protective. It shields the communicator from emotional chaos. In tense conversations, someone who keeps rhythm doesn't escalate. They don't match anger with anger. They lower the pace. They breathe slower, and that slows the other person down too, without a single command, because emotion is contagious, but so is calm. Even in leadership, timing is king. Great leaders don't deliver bad news in panic, they ground it. They speak slowly, clearly, letting each word carry clarity and care. They wait before answering questions, showing their team that every response is thoughtful. In doing so, they earn trust not just for what they say, but how they carry what they say. To build this rhythm, practice is essential. Record your voice, play it back. Notice where you rush, where you could pause, where your energy drops, then adjust. Practice slowing down your thinking before you speak. Take longer breaths. Create pauses between key points. Let your listener catch up, not just intellectually but emotionally. Reading fiction helps too. The pacing of well-written dialogue teaches rhythm. Watch films with strong monologues. Study how the actors pause, how the music rises, how timing tells the story even more than the words do. And above all, listen. Not just to what people say, but to how they say it. Listen to their rhythm, where they hesitate, where their voice shakes, where they speed up. The more you attune to these signals, the more control you gain over your own rhythm. You become not just a speaker, but a composer of emotion. That's what the world's most persuasive minds are. Composers. They don't just communicate. They orchestrate connection. Through silence, through pacing, through rhythm that aligns with the human heart. When you master timing, people feel safe with you. When you master timing, people remember you. And when you master timing, you don't need to shout, because your rhythm will speak louder than any volume ever could. Chapter 3. Emotional Temperature. How to read people before they speak. Before words arrive, emotions enter the room first. And the world's most persuasive minds don't just listen to what's said, they tune into what's felt. Long before a sentence begins, they're already reading the invisible signals. A shifted glance, a tightened jaw, the rhythm of someone's breath, the tremor in a voice even before it speaks. They are fluent in the language of emotional temperature. Emotional temperature isn't about mood, it's about presence, about being able to walk into a room and instantly feel what's happening beneath the surface. Not through magic, but through awareness, deep, practiced awareness of how emotion lives inside the body. Because people may lie with words, but their emotional heat never hides for long. The persuasive communicator knows how to scan the atmosphere, almost like checking the weather. Is this space warm with trust? Is it cold with tension? Is it foggy with confusion or crackling with anger? Each space carries its own charge, and to influence that space, you first have to respect it. You have to feel it before you try to shift it. They do this through stillness, not action. When they enter a room, they don't speak right away. They observe. They notice who's avoiding eye contact, Who's trying too hard to smile? Who's leaning back with folded arms? Who's leaning forward with curiosity? They scan posture, not just position, because bodies reveal what voices try to hide. It's in the small things. The way someone taps their foot under the table, the way they fiddle with their sleeve when nervous, the way someone's breath shortens when they feel defensive. These micro-movements, often dismissed by most, are high-volume signals to someone who's attuned. The persuasive mind doesn't need to ask how someone feels, they already know. This emotional radar also picks up energy. Some people enter a conversation radiating chaos. Others bring a kind of still gravity. The communicator feels these shifts and adjusts themselves before engaging. They match energy, not to mimic, but to mirror just enough to create trust. Then they slowly regulate the tempo. They lead the emotional climate, not by forcing it, but by understanding it first. It's similar to how animals survive in the wild. They don't just see their environment, they sense it. They know when something is off, even if it's quiet. They feel the presence of danger, the tension in the air. Humans are no different. We feel each other long before we comprehend each other, and the best communicators never forgot that primal skill. They also read tone. Not just the words, but how those words ride the breath. If someone says, "I'm fine," but their voice tightens and their eyes drop, the persuasive mind doesn't take the words at face value. They feel the dissonance. They know something's not aligned, and instead of challenging it directly, they stay soft. They hold space. They let safety grow until the real story arrives. This ability isn't built overnight. It comes from years of watching people without judgment, of choosing stillness over reaction, of slowing down enough to see what's behind the mask. The persuasive mind doesn't jump to conclusions. They listen longer. They listen beneath the surface. This skill also keeps them grounded in conflict. When tension rises, most people react. They either match the tension with aggression or shut down completely. But the persuasive communicator knows how to feel someone's emotional temperature without catching their fire. They keep their own nervous system calm, steady. They breathe slower. They speak lower. They make themselves the most emotionally regulated person in the room. And in doing so, they begin to pull others into that state. They're not immune to emotion, but they are anchored. Even when the air is thick with judgment or fear, they don't drown in it. They float, observe, adjust. Because when you read emotional temperature, you can forecast reactions before they happen. You know which words to soften, when to pause, when to offer silence instead of advice, when to guide the moment back to safety. In negotiation, this becomes a superpower. The persuasive mind can sense when the other party is starting to close down, even if they're still smiling. They feel the shift, and they shift with it. They might change tone, ask a grounding question, offer a moment of breath. They don't push through, they pull back just enough to keep the space open. In relationships, this is the foundation of emotional intimacy, knowing when someone's silence means they're tired versus hurt, when a sharp tone hides sadness, when distance is a signal, not rejection. And instead of demanding clarity right away, they offer comfort, safety, warmth. They understand that most people will open up only when they feel emotionally seen without being dissected. They also learn to monitor their own emotional temperature, because you can't read others clearly if your own state is chaotic. The persuasive communicator checks in with themselves first. Am I calm? Am I triggered? Am I present, or am I reacting from an old wound? Only when they're rooted do they engage with others, because clarity begins within. The truth is, people are not mysteries. They are walking signals. Every face tells a story. Every body carries truth. And the persuasive mind doesn't decode people. They honor them. They listen with their whole body. They respond with gentleness. They hold space without fixing. And because of this, people open around them, share more, trust faster. The world moves fast. And in that speed, most people miss the real conversation, the one happening beneath the surface. But the ones who master persuasion are the ones who slow down, who see what others don't, who feel what others ignore, and who respond not to words, but to truth. That's the hidden gift of emotional temperature. It doesn't just help you understand others, it helps you love them better, lead them more wisely, and speak in a way that reaches the soul, not just the ears. Chapter 4: The Hidden Architecture of Persuasive Listening. Most people don't really listen, they wait to speak. They nod out of politeness, they catch the general idea just enough to reply. But persuasive minds, those who leave impact when they communicate, they listen like architects. They don't just hear words, they study the structure behind them. They trace the emotions, the motives, the weight carried in each pause. Their listening is deep, still, and intentional. When someone speaks, they reveal more than just information. They reveal how they think. They reveal what matters to them, what they fear, what they hope for, and what they don't know how to say. And it takes a certain kind of stillness to catch that. Not the stillness of silence, but the stillness of presence. A kind of mental spaciousness that clears the room for someone else's voice to stretch out and be heard fully. The persuasive mind never rushes to fill a gap in the conversation. They know that sometimes the real truth comes after the silence. When someone pauses mid-sentence and looks away, most people move on. But the persuasive listener leans inward. Not physically, but emotionally. They hold that space. They make it safe for more to come out. And most of the time, it does. They don't just listen to what's said, they listen to how it's said, the pacing, the hesitations, the sudden shifts in tone or volume. Every pattern has meaning. A fast speaker might be covering up anxiety, a flat voice might be carrying exhaustion, a sudden jump in energy could signal defensiveness or excitement. The persuasive listener hears the whole orchestra, not just the melody. They also listen beneath disagreement. When someone says no, they don't just hear rejection. They ask themselves, what truth is trying to protect itself here? What wound is speaking underneath this resistance? Because every sharp word has a softer root underneath. And the persuasive communicator doesn't try to argue with the sharpness, they listen long enough to find the root. This level of listening creates trust that words alone can't build. People feel seen, not because they're praised, but because they're understood. They open up, not because they're forced to, but because they feel heard in a way they didn't expect. It disarms them, gently. The persuasive mind also listens between the lines of praise. When someone says, "You're always so composed," the average person might smile and move on. But the perceptive listener hears the hidden question, how do you stay composed when I can't? When someone says, "I could never do what you do," it might sound like admiration, but it's often a quiet request for guidance. Persuasive communicators catch these moments. They respond to what was meant, not just what was said. They are not distracted listeners. They are not multitasking with their eyes elsewhere or their hands busy. They're all in. And because of that, people speak more freely around them. They don't rush to advice. They don't interrupt with solution. They sit in the tension with the speaker until clarity begins to rise on its own. Because people rarely need answers right away. They need mirrors. And persuasive minds offer that through their stillness. This level of listening isn't about perfection. It's about humility, about entering a conversation, knowing you don't have to lead it. You don't have to be right. You don't even have to be interesting. You just have to care enough to stay open. And that quiet openness often does more to change people than the best rehearsed speeches. Persuasive listeners also remember not just names and facts, but emotional patterns. They recall the tone someone had the last time they felt small. They remember the insecurity that peeked through a joke. And because they carry that memory, they know how to speak more gently the next time. Their words feel targeted, but in the most generous way, as if they've been listening long before this moment. It's also how they avoid unnecessary conflict. because they sense emotional shift before it becomes an outburst. They feel the tension rise, the breath tighten, the hands clench, and instead of responding to the behavior, they respond to the pressure building underneath it. They lower their voice. They ask a grounding question. They slow the rhythm of the conversation, not to control but to ease, to de-escalate, to keep connection alive when ego wants to shut it down. This kind of listening creates rare moments in a noisy world, moments when someone walks away from a conversation feeling lighter. Even if nothing was fixed, they feel seen, not judged, met, not managed. And that feeling stays with them. It reshapes how they see themselves. There's also a kind of listening the persuasive mind does inward. They listen to themselves as they speak. They stay aware of their own tone, their own pace. They monitor their internal climate so they don't project it onto others. If they feel anger rise, they notice it. If they feel ego flare, they slow down. They don't let their reactions speak louder than their values. That self-awareness makes their listening clean, untainted by their own emotional noise. In leadership, this listening builds loyalty, because teams trust leaders who make them feel heard, not just managed. In families, it builds safety. Children open up to parents who hear without correcting every sentence. In friendships, it builds depth. Not every problem needs solving. Sometimes being heard is the solution. The persuasive mind knows this, and that's why their words land with such weight, because they're always the product of deep listening. Their communication doesn't begin with their voice. It begins with their attention. It begins with how they enter the space, not to be impressive, but to be impressed upon by the truth already in the room. They are students before they are speakers. They observe before they respond. They absorb before they shape. And because of that, when they finally speak, it feels like medicine. Not because it's clever, but because it fits, because it was born in the soil of real understanding. Listening isn't the soft skill people think it is. It's the sharpest skill in persuasive communication. It doesn't just give you information, it gives you influence. Because when you truly hear someone, they remember not just your words, but your energy. And they lean in again the next time. That's what the best communicators do. They listen like sculptors, chiseling away the noise, waiting for the shape of meaning to emerge. They wait longer, they hear deeper. And when they speak, the room listens, not because they demanded it, but because they earned it in silence. Chapter 5: How Tonality Shapes Truth. Words are what people hear, but tone is what they feel. And what people feel, they remember. You could say all the right things and still leave someone cold. You could speak facts and sound like fiction, or say something simple and leave someone deeply moved. The difference is never just the what, it's the how. It's the way the words arrive, the rhythm, the rise and fall, the breath between phrases, the softness, the strength, the silence. That's what persuasive minds understand instinctively. Tonality is not decoration, it is delivery. It is truth enhancement. Think of how a child responds to their mother's voice when she whispers gently after a fall. It's not the sentence that calms them, it's the tone, that softness tells the nervous system, "You're safe now." That's the power persuasive communicators master. They know how to place emotion inside their voice, not on top of it. And here's the deeper truth. People don't trust flat voices. They don't trust voices that sound rehearsed, robotic, or too perfect. What they trust is authenticity. And authenticity has texture. It has pauses. It has stumbles. It has volume that changes with intensity, and silence that allows feelings to breathe. Persuasive voices breathe. They move like waves, not in a straight line, but with rhythm that reflects emotional sincerity. The best communicators don't speak in monotone, even when they're calm. They speak with life. They use tone to underline emotion, not to manipulate, but to connect. When they express sadness, there's a fall in their voice. When they share something joyful, the air around them lifts. When they want you to feel something heavy, they slow down. They drop their tone just enough that the words settle deep, and people follow. You can hear conviction in someone's voice before you understand their logic. You can feel fear before you know their story. That's why persuasive people take care of how their tone lands, not because they're pretending, but because they understand your tone reveals your truth, whether you like it or not. And sometimes it's not about sounding confident. It's about sounding real. You can persuade someone more powerfully by lowering your voice and softening your tempo than by shouting certainty. There's something magnetic about quiet confidence, where the tone says, "I don't need to overpower you, I just need you to feel what I'm saying." The persuasive mind also knows how to use vocal variety. They don't speak on a single emotional frequency. They stretch their voice, not to perform, but to create resonance. They let their voice rise slightly when asking something meaningful. They let it settle low when sharing something heavy. They use silence, not as emptiness, but as emphasis. Because sometimes the most persuasive moment in a conversation is the breath between two words. Think of a powerful speaker, one who doesn't rush, one who takes their time, who speaks with gravity. You feel like each word has weight, not because of what they're saying, but because of how they're saying it. Their tone slows down your brain. You lean in without knowing why. That's tonality mastery. It turns simple words into felt experience. On the other hand, harsh or anxious tone, even with good intention, pushes people away. A fast, sharp tone signals threat. A high-pitched rush of words activates defensiveness. People may agree with your ideas, but emotionally withdraw from your voice. That's why persuasive communicators calibrate. They match tone to the moment. If someone is grieving, they soften. If someone is excited, they lift. If someone is lost, they slow. This emotional mirroring creates alignment, and alignment creates trust. In personal relationships, tonality is often the difference between connection and collision. The sentence "I'm listening" can feel comforting or condescending, depending entirely on tone. The same words can offer safety or sting, like sarcasm. And we know it instantly. That's the human sensitivity to tone. It bypasses the brain and goes straight to the body. That's why persuasive minds train not just their language, but their delivery. They listen to how they sound. They rehearse, not to become polished, but to become aware. They record their voice and play it back. They ask, "Does my voice carry what I intend? Or am I leaking insecurity, arrogance, or fear through my tone?" Because people hear more than you think. They feel your voice, not just your vocabulary. When they speak to a room, they don't just throw words into space. They fill the room with tone. They stretch phrases. They modulate volume. They use pacing as punctuation. Their voice becomes a symphony, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, but always deliberate. And they know how to reset tone when needed. If a conversation gets tense, they don't raise their volume. They lower it. They soften, not to submit, but to disarm, to bring emotional temperature down. They understand that shouting never wins hearts. But calm voice, with firm tone, that's magnetic. It draws people toward your energy instead of making them brace against it. In negotiation, tone often decides outcome more than logic. A steady voice that says, "Here's what we're offering," communicates power better than any technical explanation. And a compassionate tone that says, "I understand your concern," diffuses conflict faster than proof. The persuasive voice isn't the loudest, it's the most grounded. It carries clarity, not because it's flawless, but because it's felt. And here's the most important part. The way you speak to others starts with the way you speak to yourself. If your inner voice is cruel, panicked, rushed, your outer tone will reflect that. But if your self-talk is gentle, strong, compassionate, your voice carries that too. Tonality begins in the mind, long before it reaches the mouth. That's why the world's most persuasive minds aren't just skilled with words. They're skilled with energy. Their voice is energy. It carries their conviction. It carries their peace. It carries their empathy. And when those things ride inside your tone, people don't just hear you. They believe you. They trust you. They feel changed by your presence, not just your message. Because in the end, tone isn't a technical skill. It's a mirror. It reflects your presence, your values, your truth. Words are what we say. Tone is what we mean. And in the ears of the listener, tone is what stays. Chapter 6. Silence, the secret language of the persuasive. In a world obsessed with noise, silence becomes power. Most people fill silence as fast as they can. They rush to reply. They fear awkwardness. They scramble for words. But the most persuasive minds understand something deeper. Silence isn't the absence of speech. It's the presence of gravity. They don't fear silence. They use it. When a persuasive person pauses, it's never accidental. It's intentional. It draws people in. It says without words, what comes next matters. It creates space, not emptiness. And in that space, the listener leans forward. They wait. They feel. And that pause, that moment of stillness, becomes louder than anything else in the room. That's the paradox. Silence, when placed with precision, speaks volumes. Think of a great speaker standing before a crowd. Their words land hard, then they stop. They don't rush. They let the air settle. The silence sharpens the last sentence like a blade. Everyone hears it again inside their own mind. The meaning deepens. That's not a pause of hesitation. That's a pause of conviction. Persuasive minds don't just speak for impact. They withhold for impact. Because they know something most people miss. Silence forces the listener to participate. It creates a mental echo. It opens a gap that the mind instinctively wants to fill. But instead of clutter, it invites clarity. When someone tells a story and pauses mid-sentence, letting the moment breathe, the audience feels it more. When someone shares something vulnerable and then says nothing more, that silence says, sit with this. It gives the words time to land. It's not just about public speaking. In intimate conversations, silence becomes even more sacred. When someone is grieving, silence is often the kindest response. Not empty, indifferent silence, but present, compassionate silence. The kind that says, I'm here. I don't need to fix this. I'll sit with you through it. That kind of presence speaks more than any advice ever could. In conflict, silence holds power too. When someone attacks or provokes, most people react. They defend. They raise their voice, but the persuasive mind waits. They don't let emotion hijack the moment. They breathe. They say nothing until they've chosen the exact words that match their intent. That pause disarms. It signals control. It shifts power from reaction to intention. And even in business, silence can tilt the entire negotiation. A skilled negotiator knows when to stop talking, when to make the offer, and then go quiet. That silence puts pressure on the other side. Not through aggression, but through tension. Because people are uncomfortable with silence, they start filling it, and in that scramble they often reveal more than they intended. But the persuasive communicator doesn't scramble. They own the silence. They are not afraid of a moment without words, because they understand that sometimes silence is the only honest response. Sometimes it's the only way to honor the weight of what's just been said. They've trained themselves to hold that space, to be still without being passive, to be present without being loud, to listen without interrupting the rhythm of understanding. Silence also creates contrast. Just like darkness makes light shine brighter, silence makes the next words carry more force. The brain marks it as important. It feels like the pause was earned. And because of that, the impact is tenfold. Even in persuasion through writing or audio, silence translates. a well-placed pause in a sentence, a line break, a slowed-down delivery. These things create rhythm. They control emotional timing. They allow the audience to feel instead of just absorb. This rhythm builds emotional trust. It tells the audience, I won't overwhelm you. I'll let the truth breathe. And in a world where everyone shouts, that calm timing becomes irresistible. The persuasive mind also uses internal silence. They don't just pause outwardly. They quiet their mind while others speak. They don't rush to rehearse their next argument. They don't plan their comeback while pretending to listen. They really listen. And that takes internal stillness. It takes restraint. It takes discipline. Because most people live in noise, not just outside but inside, thoughts racing, emotions flaring, ego talking too loud. But the persuasive person knows, still minds make powerful voices. Silence on the inside allows clarity on the outside. This doesn't mean they're passive or disengaged. Quite the opposite. Their silence is full of intent, full of presence, full of gravity. When they finally speak, you know it's been considered, it's been chosen. It's not just noise to fill space, it's substance. And people feel that difference. They trust it. They follow it. This is why truly persuasive leaders don't speak the most. They speak the clearest. They speak when the moment is ripe. They pause when the moment is heavy. They step back when emotion is loud. And in doing so, they lead through rhythm, not just reason. Even the way they end conversations has silence in it. They don't always finish with a final argument. Sometimes they end with presence, with a look, with a gentle nod, with a hand on the shoulder, and that wordless exit lingers. It creates memory because it wasn't about winning. It was about witnessing. This is the subtle genius of the world's most persuasive minds. They understand that silence is not the enemy of communication. It is the frame that holds it. It is not the gap between ideas. It is the space where ideas become real. And when used with care, silence becomes not just powerful, it becomes unforgettable. Chapter 7. The body speaks first. Before a single word is spoken, the body has already spoken 1,000 times. Long before someone opens their mouth, the eyes, the hands, the posture, the breath, all tell a story. People notice without realizing. They feel without explanation. The persuasive mind understands this. They know the body is never silent. It's always speaking, always transmitting. And that's why the world's most persuasive communicators don't just master language. They master presence. They understand the language of posture, the tone of movement, the tempo of gesture. Because they know in every interaction, the body speaks first, and often loudest. Watch someone walk into a room. Even without a single word, people form an impression. Is the person slouched, hurried, avoidant, or are they grounded, upright, still? One posture says, I'm unsure of myself. Another says, I belong here. It's not about arrogance, it's about alignment between the inner and outer self. The persuasive person carries congruence. Their words, their tone, their body, all say the same thing. That alignment is rare. And because it's rare, it's trusted. When someone says, I believe in you, and their body leans forward, eyes warm, hands open, you feel it. But if they say the same words with crossed arms, darting eyes or fake smile, you feel the mismatch, and the message breaks. The body never lies. It's either reinforcing the message or undermining it. That's why persuasive people train their body language, not to manipulate, but to reflect truth more clearly. They remove unconscious habits that block connection. They breathe slower. They hold eye contact a moment longer. They allow their shoulders to drop instead of tighten. They don't fidget when nervous. They ground themselves, because the audience feels it all, even when they don't know they do. A steady gaze says, I'm here with you. A calm gesture says, I'm not in a rush. An open stance says, I have nothing to hide. These small signals compound, and together, they build emotional safety. And where there is safety, there is influence. The world's most persuasive minds don't hide behind their words. They let their body show the emotion. When they're excited, it lives in their eyes. When they're concerned, it rests in their brows. When they're sincere, it softens their hands. They're not acting, they're embodying the message. In everyday conversation, people respond more to facial expression than verbal expression. A single raised eyebrow can speak more than an entire paragraph. A subtle nod can replace a full sentence. A sudden stillness can silence a room. These are not tricks, they are truth expressions. The persuasive person doesn't force smiles. They don't overact or exaggerate. They align. Their face and their message move together. Their breath and their thoughts stay in sync. They slow down when something matters. They lean in when something connects, and the person in front of them feels seen. In conflict, body language matters more than words. When two people argue, even calm words can't hide clenched fists or tense jaws. That's why persuasive communicators don't just choose their words, they regulate their presence, they slow their breath, they uncross their arms, they soften their face. Not because they're weak, but because they want to create connection, not resistance. And here's the secret. The body isn't just speaking to others, it's also speaking to you. If you stand tall, your brain feels more powerful. If you relax your jaw, your thoughts settle. If you breathe deep, your emotions follow. Persuasive people understand this internal feedback loop. They use posture and breath not only to influence others, but to lead themselves. Before a high-stakes moment, they don't just practice lines, they practice grounding. They center themselves physically so that their words come from presence, not panic. And when they enter a room, they carry presence like a silent message. You are safe with me. I know what I bring. I am here for this moment. People feel that energy before they hear any sentence. Even in silence, the body communicates status. A person who owns space, who doesn't shrink, who doesn't rush, commands attention, not through force, through calm certainty. They don't apologize for being there. They don't beg to be heard. Their stillness says, I'm not performing, I'm being. And that difference is magnetic. In persuasion, calm is power, stillness is trust. Open hands are welcome. Soft eyes are safety. These are not random gestures, they are emotional cues. And persuasive people learn to master them with care. But they don't fake it, they embody it. Because the body knows when you're lying. The hands betray nervousness, the shoulders betray fear. The smile betrays distance. You can't hide it for long. But when your message is honest, your body supports you naturally. You don't have to think about looking confident, you feel confident, and people feel that from you. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real, being regulated, being present. That's what makes the body powerful in communication. Because it doesn't just deliver a message, it becomes the message. Chapter 8. Listening like a master, Persuader. Persuasion doesn't begin with speaking, it begins with listening. The most persuasive minds in the world are not the loudest. They're not the ones who interrupt or dominate conversations. They're the ones who listen so fully, so deeply, that the other person feels understood, often for the first time. Because being heard is rare. Being truly listened to is even rarer. Most people listen to reply. Their ears are open, but their minds are already forming the next sentence. They nod while preparing rebuttals. They hear, but they don't receive. And the moment slips away, unnoticed, unfelt. But the persuasive person waits. Not impatiently, not pretending. They wait with presence. They listen with their whole body. They hold silence when it's needed. They attune. In that moment, they don't just gather words, they read tone, they read hesitation, they sense the energy behind what's being said, and often what's not being said. They're not trying to win, they're trying to understand, and that alone disarms people. Because when someone feels understood, their defenses drop, they feel safe, they feel seen. And in that space, influence happens naturally, not through force, but through connection. The best listeners don't rush to fill the silence. They let the speaker finish. They don't interrupt stories. They don't hijack moments. They hold space. And that silence says, I'm with you. I'm not here to perform. I'm here to witness. This kind of listening changes the energy in the room. You can feel it. The air gets still. The rhythm slows. The other person relaxes. Their guard lowers. They speak more openly. And suddenly, what started as a surface conversation becomes something real. That's when persuasion begins, not in speaking but in listening with intention. Persuasive minds listen for values. They hear what matters most. When someone says, I just don't want to feel like I'm failing, a master listener hears the need for competence, respect, reassurance. They hear identity. And instead of arguing facts, they speak to that identity. They speak to the core of the person. Because they heard it first. They listen between the lines. They sense the fear hiding behind bravado. They feel the doubt wrapped inside confidence. They recognize the wound behind the anger. And because of that, they respond not just with logic, but with emotional accuracy. That's why their words land deeper. Because their words were guided by listening. Persuasive people also listen with curiosity, not judgment. When someone disagrees with them, they don't shut down. They lean in. They ask, not to trap, but to learn. What makes you feel that way? Tell me more. These questions aren't weapons, they're invitations. And they make the other person feel valued, even in disagreement. That kind of listening earns respect. It turns opponents into collaborators. It creates a space where influence can breathe, not choke. In high-stakes conversations, the persuasive person keeps their attention sharp. They're not distracted. They're not looking at their phone. They're not waiting for their turn. They're present, fully, undivided. Because nothing is more persuasive than undivided attention. In relationships, listening builds trust. When one person truly listens, the other starts to open. When that happens consistently, walls fall. And over time, trust grows, not through grand gestures, but through repeated moments of being heard. In leadership, listening builds loyalty. Employees don't follow titles. They follow people who listen, who make them feel understood, who take their input seriously. Leaders who listen don't need to shout. Their team listens back because they've been listened to. This is the quiet loop of persuasive leadership. Listen first. Understand deeply. Respond precisely. In negotiation, master listeners gain advantage without saying much. They hear what the other side wants beneath the surface. They notice which terms trigger tension. They spot where the emotional leverage lies. They don't rush to make offers. They let the conversation reveal itself. And when they speak, they say exactly what needs to be said. Nothing more, nothing less. Because they've been listening with strategy, not just politeness. And in moments of conflict, persuasive minds stay centered. They don't flare up. They don't react emotionally. They listen to the pain behind the attack. They recognize that most conflict is unspoken fear. They hold steady. They respond to the wound, not the weapon. And because of that, they heal instead of escalate. This is what makes great communicators unforgettable. Not their vocabulary, not their wit, but their attention. They listen with stillness, with curiosity, with precision. And because of that, their words carry more weight. Because their words are not scattered. They are shaped by what was heard. Chapter 9, Emotional Framing in Everyday Speech. Words carry meaning, tone, adds emotion. But emotional framing, the way you embed emotion into your message, gives power. It shapes not just what people think, but how they feel as they listen. Every time someone speaks, they cast an emotional frame, whether they realize it or not. That frame sets the mood, colors interpretation, and guides response. A simple message like "we have a problem" can feel like alarm, anxiety, or opportunity depending on how it's framed emotionally. Persuasive communicators understand that they're not just saying words, they're delivering emotional cues. They choose words that feel like comfort to a troubled mind or light to a heavy heart. They speak not just to inform, but to create atmosphere. A leader might say, "We're facing a challenge," with steady calm, and the team leans in. The same phrase, delivered with tension, can seed panic. Emotional framing matters. The emphasis, the pace, the warmth, even the breath before the phrase. To frame emotionally, persuasive speakers match the underlying mood. If someone is anxious, they invite calm with a steady tone and reassurance like, "We'll figure this out together." If someone is doubtful, they plant a seed of possibility with gentle contrast. It's okay if the first step feels uncertain. That's how every journey begins. These frames don't ignore reality, they just shift perspective emotionally. Everyday conversations offer countless opportunities to use emotional frames. A partner saying, "I'm worried about us," can sound accusation or intimacy based on delivery. A friend saying, "I can't talk right now," can push you away or signal a space of protection, depending on tone and frame. The most persuasive communicators feel these nuances. They don't respond to words alone. They respond to the emotional layer beneath them. This skill also helps them navigate tension. In conflict, someone might say, "That's not fair." A persuasive response avoids defensiveness. It frames connection. "I hear how hurt that made you feel. Let's unpack that together." In those moments, framing doesn't dismiss pain. It acknowledges it and holds a path forward. Even compliments carry emotional frames. A praise like, "That idea was smart," is kind, but distant. A more powerful frame reframes seeing someone, "That insight was exactly what this moment needed." Now the compliment is layered with care, alignment, and significance. Emotional frames make ordinary recognition feel memorable. Persuasion in written speech also leans on framing. Reader engagement soars when messages start with meaning before logic. Instead of "here are the facts," they frame with emotional connection. "Here's what I'm worried we're missing, so here's the facts." It changes how the information lands. This isn't manipulation, it's attunement. It's saying, "I see how you feel, and here's something that might help." It shifts influence from demanding agreement to inviting openness. Persuasive people also frame when saying no. Instead of blunt "I can't do that," they offer connection. "I wish I could help more right now. I'm stretched, but I'll support where I can." This frame maintains territory without breaking trust. The listener hears empathy before boundaries. In teaching, a guide might frame feedback this way: "You're doing well, and this one thing could help you reach the next level." The frame carries encouragement in clarity. It opens growth, instead of shutting it down. Children respond powerfully to emotional frames. "Please walk" becomes "your footsteps are gentle, like you care for the quiet." Suddenly direction becomes connection, not command. The persuasive communicator also uses framing in stories. They don't just share facts, they wrap them in context that stirs empathy. They begin with emotion. "I felt lost once," not "I had challenges." It's not about dramatizing, it's about giving emotional entrance inside the message. When you give people a feeling to travel with, they follow, not just listen. This framing becomes even more powerful in difficult conversations. With someone grieving, a framed message might be, "I can't imagine what you're feeling, but I'm here still." That emotional frame holds tenderness without language getting in the way. It invites closeness. Behind every successful interaction lies emotional framing. It's not just what you say, it's the emotional direction you lead people toward. Persuasive communicators are aware of this. They pause to feel the emotional surface. They choose words that reflect, repair, and invite connection. And the world leans in. Chapter 10. Impression Management. Being seen without performance. From the moment someone enters a room, their presence speaks before their mouth does. Whether they move with ease or tension, use a smile or maintain a neutral expression, their body broadcasts messages. The world's most persuasive communicators know this. They don't announce themselves with volume. They introduce themselves through alignment. They show who they are. Not through performance, but through speaking their truth, without needing to dress it up. Every person constantly manages impressions. It's not about fakery, it's about integrity. Sociologist Irving Goffman showed that we all engage in impression management, like actors shaping how others see us, balancing authenticity with context. We present a front-stage version of ourselves based on the audience and setting. Even if it's unconscious, the persuasive mind does this thoughtfully. They don't become someone else. They choose which part of themselves to shine based on who's watching, and to stay grounded, not perform. They imagine themselves as guests entering someone's mind, not judges claiming control. They don't speak to dominate, they speak to connect. They don't tilt their body toward the camera, they tilt it toward trust. They don't plaster a smile, they allow warmth to arrive through eye contact. They don't hide their discomfort, they soften it, so their humanity becomes felt, not just seen. To manage impression well, they practice self-monitoring, not to change who they are, but to show their best self at that moment. They notice, am I looming here? Can I lean in more instead? They check in with their tone. Is my voice urgent, or can I soften it? Their presence is tailored, not forced. It adjusts, but the integrity never shifts. Persuasive communicators also understand that you can reveal without performing. You don't have to dominate a conversation to be remembered. Often, people linger around those who don't need to be seen. They're relaxed, calm, present. Their competence shows, not through grand gestures, but through consistency, through alignment between words and body, presence and pause, intention and delivery. This skill isn't manipulation. It's emotional stewardship. You don't pretend to be something else. You show up clearly and honestly. You let your actions speak its value quietly. People who practice illusion collapse when scrutiny rises, but those who practice authenticity strengthen under attention. Over time, this grounded presence builds trust and respect. People say, they don't need applause, they just are. They don't shine through bright spotlight, they shine because they've cast a reflection that others can stand in safely. And that reflection, steady, warm, calm, is more persuasive than any show. Chapter 11. The invisible story behind every word. Every conversation carries a silent script. Beyond the words themselves is an invisible story formed by memory, fear, longing, and hope that shapes how someone speaks and how they listen. The most persuasive communicators don't just pay attention to what is said, they sense the story behind it first. They understand that communication is an emotional narrative, whether acknowledged or not. Let's say someone hesitates at a question. Most people notice the pause and move on, thinking maybe the person is unsure. But the persuasive communicator feels something deeper. That pause might contain fear, fear of judgment, fear of being wrong, fear of not measuring up. If they respond quickly, they miss the chance to connect with what's really happening. If they respond with patience, with presence, they offer permission for the story to surface. When someone defends themselves sharply over something small, the persuasive mind doesn't dismiss the reaction. They sense the underlying script. I'm not heard. I'm seen as weak. I'm vulnerable. They listen deeper, without imposing diagnosis, and help the person feel safe enough to tell the rest of the story. Then true connection begins. Every word is spoken from history. A casual "why didn't you answer" might carry years of feeling ignored. A habitual joke about being forgetful might shield shame or insecurity. Without this awareness, communication becomes surface level, but with it, one speaks not just to logic, but to the wound behind it. Values are often unspoken stories. When someone says, "I just want fairness," persuasive communicators don't argue about definition. They recognize what's under the plea, a memory of injustice. They respond by acknowledging that pain before offering perspective. That's emotional accuracy in speech. Stories also reveal how people define themselves. When someone says, "I'm always late," they're not bragging about a habit. They might be trying to fit into a role. They may be saying, "I'm trying to belong, but I always fall short." Persuasive communicators hold awareness that identity is fragile. They don't simply comment. They create space for the person to stand differently. Punctuality will come. "I've seen you show up when it matters." And sometimes silence finishes the sentence. When someone shares something heartbreaking with low volume, the persuasive communicator doesn't immediately rush to fill it. They wait, they hold, and in that silence, empathy is spoken. The story doesn't need more words, it needs presence. In group settings, the hidden story shifts. A quiet person may seem shy, but the persuasive mind doesn't build a policy. They sense the untold narrative. Maybe they feel less safe. Maybe they've been judged before. Instead of spotlighting them with a question, they create invitation with kindness, aligned tone, steady gaze, so the story can settle in before words follow. Even conversations with strangers carry hidden stories. A barista's curt response may feel unkind, but the perceptive communicator doesn't take it personally. They sense historical overload. Perhaps the barista is tired, overwhelmed, or undervalued. So they offer a smile, patience, a simple "thank you." That quiet response shifts the story of connection, even for that short moment. Persuasive communicators also monitor their own story. When their voice wavers, they notice fear. When they default to apology, they recognize insecurity. They stay rooted. They don't allow their past scripts to hijack their presence now. That grounding shapes how their voice lands, real, not reactive. Stories can be rewritten. A person who says, "I always fail," when met with empathy and a clear frame like, "That's not your story," can feel an internal shift. Persuasion doesn't force new narratives, it invites discovery. Maybe this time, things can go differently. This is the power behind influence, not charismatic technique, but emotional clarity. Persuasion shines where the story beneath the story is born, where patience meets pain, where presence meets denial, where silence becomes translation, and perspective becomes healing. That is the invisible architecture of communication. Chapter 12, The Echo That Persuasion Leaves Behind. There's a moment right after a powerful conversation when everything feels still. Words have been said, silences have passed. A decision might still be pending, but something inside has already shifted. That moment, quiet, deep, almost invisible, is where real persuasion lives. It's not just in the pitch, not just in the rhythm, not even in the clever turn of phrase. Persuasion lives in what remains after, in the way a person carries your words home, in the space they revisit in their own mind, again and again, wondering why something you said stuck. This is the echo. The world's most persuasive minds understand that influence isn't a one-time event. It's not about making someone say yes today. It's about giving them something they can't shake off tomorrow. It's about shaping belief, not forcing change. They don't chase impact. They create resonance. That resonance comes from truth, from consistency, from depth, from care. It shows up in the parent who speaks softly, and years later the child still hears that sentence like a compass. In the teacher whose encouragement was brief, but became the root of lifelong confidence. in the stranger who said, "I see you," and made someone feel real for the first time in a long time. Persuasion, when done from the heart, doesn't end with conversation. It becomes memory. Throughout this journey, we've uncovered the anatomy of influence: active listening, emotional framing, clarity without domination, managing impressions without performance, storytelling, tension navigation, self-awareness, and above all, deep empathy. We've learned that powerful communication has little to do with loudness and everything to do with alignment, that the most persuasive people don't shout to be heard. They invite to be understood. They allow silence to speak. They sense the wound behind the words. They move gently, but with conviction. They carry their message not just in their voice, but in their posture, their tone, their eyes, their timing. And perhaps most importantly, they speak, even when it would be easier to stay silent, not because they crave attention, but because they know someone else needs the truth. That's the kind of persuasion that doesn't just shift opinions. It transforms lives. The truth is, the world is filled with noise. Everyone's speaking. Few are truly being heard, but those who master this craft, the quiet art of deep human communication, don't need to be loud. They speak once, and the words travel for days. That's the final lesson. Communication is not about reaching everyone. It's about reaching the right ones, those who are ready, those who are listening with their heart, not just their ears, those who, when they hear your message, will carry it forward into the lives of others. So speak, not to perform, not to impress, but to connect. Because connection is the true measure of persuasion. And when you speak like that, you don't just become a better communicator, you become a bridge between minds, between stories, between what is and what's possible. This is what the world needs more of. Thank you for walking this entire journey through the minds of the world's most persuasive communicators. If this audiobook resonated with you, stay connected. There's more to uncover, more to learn, and more voices that need to be heard, starting with your own.